Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Around the Fire series on Spirit Reflections. I'm Fred Govea, and today we're going to talk about spiritual emergence, spiritual emergency, how it all works, and learn from Andy Johns. He has an amazing story to tell us, and we're going to talk about how spiritual awakenings affect our sense of self, our mental health, and he's going to share some really beautiful insights. And if you stay until the end, he's going to guide us in a very beautiful experience by sharing a parable. So like and subscribe to our channel, follow for more. I'm going to read Andy's bio here so we can have it registered for posterity. So Andy found success in Silicon Valley over a 17-year career, working as an executive, advisor, and investor with 10 multi-billion-dollar startups. But his workaholism, along with repressed childhood traumas, contributed to psychological and spiritual struggles that culminated in various addictions and eventual burnout. A series of spiritual awakenings led to a journey of healing from childhood trauma and the death of his mom from mental illness when he was 10 years old, leading to a much deeper understanding of himself and a new mission to help others transform themselves and find a higher purpose. Today, Andy spends his time writing about mental health, spirituality, and personal transformation, as well as coaching people through spiritual awakenings. He also serves on the board of Heroic Hearts Project, supporting veterans with PTSD through psychedelic-assisted therapy. And he has recently begun working with Integrative Mental Health University, founded by Dr. Emma Bragdon, and that's where we met, and to help bring spirituality into the Western mental health care. So, without further ado, Andy, welcome to Spirit Reflections.
Thanks, Fred. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So, as we do with every guest, before we talk about the theme and the topic of our conversation, let's learn more about yourself. Take us back to where things started in your childhood.
Sure. I'll go way back. I grew up on a small family farm in Central California, the child of a blue collar family and pretty simple, humble upbringing, and had a lot of really good years, wonderful brothers, incredible father, but also some pretty challenging years. My mom suffered from pretty severe mental health issues stemming from her own childhood traumas. And so that created quite a bit of disruption early on in my life. She was in and out of psychiatric hospitals for weeks at a time, and just sort of a lot of emotional disruption in the household. Eventually, she passed away when I was 10 due to her mental illness, and that was an incredibly difficult experience. And looking back at it in retrospect, knowing what I now know about myself, um, essentially what I did was sort of look for the best coping mechanism I could in order to navigate those really difficult experiences. And one of the things that I did is that I sort of internalized this message through the sort of naturally narcissistic perspective of a young child. And I don't mean that pejoratively. It's, when you're a young child, it's sort of everything is about me, it's about me. And that's sort of part of the necessary psychology of survival. But sort of the way I internalized all those experiences was that if I was a better kid, if I was as close to perfect as it gets, maybe I could have saved her. Maybe I could have made things better. And I transformed that internalization of the trauma into a relentless drive to achieve. And I'm very thankful that I did. It served me incredibly well. I became an excellent student, usually at the top of my class in just about everything, same in sports. I went on to top 20 university, graduated from that while paying my way through it, and then made my way into the technology industry, which I didn't really plan on. The way that I got my first job in the tech sector was I just started emailing CEOs of companies.
Before we get there, Andy, I'm curious, how did you process the grief then? Was there even a chance for you to take a step back and make sense of what had happened with your mom's early passing? And with
Yeah.
your families, therapists, or religion, or what was available around you at the time to process that grief?
Honestly, wasn't able to process much of it. Some amount of it naturally came out when hearing that your mother had passed away. There's a great outpouring of the deepest grief you can imagine. But 2 weeks later, me and my brothers were back in school, and it was by necessity. We were a family that was struggling. We were low income at the time, and my father had to file for bankruptcy, in part due to medical bills, in trying to support my mom. Um, and so there were a, a few very, very hard years, and instilled with that kind of blue collar, pick yourself up mentality. It was like, we just
Right,
got to, like, let's grieve as best we can right now, but we have to move forward. Otherwise, we're not going to have food. Um, and so that's what we did. And I can recall that there were a couple of years after her passing that more stuff was wanting to come up: anger, grief, sadness, a sense of abandonment, all of those things. And they sort of popped up from time to time. Um, for example, I had a very, very difficult time as a young kid trying to spend the night at friends' houses. I didn't realize it then, but I understand it now. I was having panic attacks every night,
oh,
um, and from separation anxiety. And so, those all of that was there, but eventually my mind just said, I can't process this right now. At least I processed it as much as a 10 or 11-year-old child could,
right.
and it just sort of like crammed it down underneath this thick layer of achievement.
Andy, how old were your siblings at the time?
I have two older brothers. One was 11, and the other was 13 or 14.
Okay, pretty close in age.
Yeah.
And how did you talk to them about this, if at the time?
Uh, we didn't. We didn't, other than there were nights where I can recall these vividly, where it would be bedtime and I would be laying in bed crying, um, just from missing her and from the grief. But most of the time, I basically would bury my face in the pillow and try and keep it to myself. But there were other times where it just hurt too bad, where I would get up and go and wake up my dad and need to be with him. Um, and otherwise, there wasn't a lot of conversation about it. I think one of the things that made it even more difficult was, my parents had split. Um, Prior to her passing, she had then moved in with and was living with another man. He was not a good man at all. I know where my strong disdain for bullies comes from, and it comes from him.
I see.
Uh, and he had a pretty extensive criminal record, um, including violence. And about a week after my mom's passing, he fled. He disappeared, and left with all of her things, including the urn that she was cremated.
Wow.
Her remains were put in. Um, and so it was just all the circumstances around it. It was just so sudden. There was no closure.
Right.
There's literally no gravesite to even be able to go to.
Wow.
It was just boom. And I only have one photo myself with her from when I was less than a year old. So yeah, all those circumstances, it didn't allow for a deep
Right.
process of grieving in the moment, and that's when it all later on in life needed to come to the surface.
And how much do you attribute the lack of talking about it in your household, the fact that you were four men?
Yeah, oh yeah. It was in a farming environment.
Right.
It was like very And I know this for sure. My dad, he lost one of his brothers. My dad was 13 and his brother was 16. Huge loss for my dad. And his father, my grandfather, was a tough World War II veteran, rancher from Texas. What they call the salt of the earth, big,
Right.
strong, tough man who I never saw show emotion other than anger.
Right.
Um, and he explicitly said to my dad, the day of his brother's funeral, he said, "Don't you cry, don't cry." Um, and
Wow.
that atmosphere uh, was not conducive to, hey, let's sit down and process this. Now, to my dad's
Right.
credit, he reversed that trend, and he's shown me what it means to be open and emotional as a man. Um,
Beautiful.
and the ability to cry. And that's had a really powerful influence on me. And that's what he internalized and learned from his own childhood. He said, like, that's not right. I'm not going to raise my kids that way.
Beautiful. Good for him.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you find a way to somehow by yourself cope by channeling this inner drive to succeed and achieve perfection at all costs?
Yeah. Yeah. And I was relentless, as my dad would say, he never once had to ask me to do my homework. I think what happened was God did gift me with I'd say an above average intellectual ability and strong work ethic. And I think there were signs early on that I was a gifted student, and so I was put into like the gifted program. And so I understood and recognized that about myself, and so I think that that's what I turned to because I realized that that's when I felt good. That's when I was showered with praise and with love from the adults in the world, and so I just buried myself into school and sports. So, for example, like I don't say this to brag, I say this as a demonstration of just how dialed in I was by my senior year in high school. I graduated, I think I was number three out of a little over 500 students. I was basically one A plus away from, being valedictorian kind of thing. Captain of the baseball team. I played basketball as well. I was on student government. My summer before my senior year, I spent time at Georgetown University studying anatomy and physiology, where I got accepted into sort of a program for the gifted in math and science. I was voted most talented. I was the prom prince and the homecoming prince all my senior year. Oh, and I was student of the month like four times. So, like, I was, my nickname was the Golden Child.
Wow.
At least some people called me that. And it worked. It felt great. It carried me through a very, very difficult period of my life. But yeah, I poured myself into just trying to be perfect.
Just occupying your mind as much with as much information, content, stimuli as possible, constructive stimuli. So then you graduate and you find you're already in California. So the next logical step would be to stumble upon the tech world.
Yeah, so I graduated, and like many students, the job prospects I had were pretty limited. I was applying to a bunch of jobs by putting my resume in a pile and never hearing anything back. On a couple of occasions, I was offered a job, but it was a non-paying job for like the first
Right.
3 months, and then which I couldn't do. I had
Right.
student loans, I had no money, and so I something in me said like I'm just going to go directly to the CEOs of these companies, and it didn't matter what company. I just wanted to find somebody who I looked at him and I said, that seems like a good person. Let me try and work for a good person whose life I want mine to resemble. And so I go to coffee shops on weekends and I'd just be emailing CEOs. I'd try and find their contact info and email them. And only one responded, Dr. Maurice Salter. Thank you, Maurice. And he was a serial entrepreneur, a former university professor, very successful man. He responded to my email, invited me to his office, and over the course of the next like 2 months or so, we built a relationship. And then one day he invited me in and he said, Andy, this is so and so. He's one of our VPs. You're going to be working for him now. And he created a job for me to essentially be the assistant to the executive staff. Whatever they needed, just go do it.
So these 2 months that you were visiting him, it was kind of his way of interviewing you for a potential position?
Kinda informally, a funny story. I'm seated in his office, and he has this huge corner office overlooking Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, which is a very, very nice area near Beverly Hills. And his office is like basically the size of a house, and he has all kinds of couches and furniture in there. And he's on the phone talking to a bank from New York, and he's wearing a nice suit. And I'm sitting there nervously on the couch, thinking like, "What am I doing here?" um, and he gets off his call, and he comes over, and he sits down, and he goes, "So what do you want?" And the thing that just flew out of my mouth was, "I want your job someday." And he started laughing and he goes, "Oh, so you want to be CEO?" And I said, "Yes." Because that was my like I didn't know why, I didn't know what I was gonna do. All I knew was I'm gonna succeed no matter what. And that's the thing that was driving me. So he laughed and we got to know each other, and I think he appreciated my upbringing and my drive. And so yeah, that was it. I think he knew early on he wanted to hire me. It was just a matter of time to sort of figure out, what
Well,
role could he create for me there.
to create a role, create a position for you to be there in his near his office. And so describe how those next few months were like.
Well, it was a crash course in technology. I didn't study computer science, but I was thrown straight into trying to understand we were a financial technology company, and so we would integrate with large banks like Bank of America and several others that existed prior to the 2007 2008 financial collapse, like Wachovia, which no longer exists. um, and so I was sort of thrust into this position where it's like, I don't know what any of this means, so I just need to figure it out. And so the
And what
first
did you
couple of
study?
I studied political science and molecular biology.
Oh wow, that's a quite a combo.
Yeah, for a while, I thought I was going to do the medical school route until I realized I didn't want to be in college for 10 more years. And so after 2.5 years of studying molecular cell and developmental biology, I switched over to political science primarily because it was like, look, I just need to graduate. I'm paying my way through school. This is really hard and expensive, and a lot of my coursework transferred over. And UCLA is known to have like a really good political science department, which they
Okay.
had some fascinating professors. Um, and yeah, so that's what I did was like, okay, and I graduated in 3.5 years, trying to minimize the amount of debt I took on, and that was it.
Okay, cool. So then you're there in a financial technology firm, finance tech, and then
Yeah, and so I'm learning and learning and learning. I get promoted in 1 year. Crazy story. One of the older VPs, Melissa from Texas, Melissa Hankin, she calls me into her office and very point blank says, "Can you do a better job than this person and this person?" And I knew what she was asking, but I was, 21 and like not a confrontational or aggressive person. So I kind of beat around the bush, was like, well, and she said, "Cut the bullshit. Can you do a better job?" And my honest answer was yes. And she goes, "Okay, thank you. You can leave." So I thought, okay. And I stepped out of the office. And then the next day, she had fired those two people who were senior to me.
wow,
And she promoted me and said, "You're now doing the job of both of them." And she said, "Good luck."
wow.
And I did a good job. I was doing great. But then the '07, '08 financial collapse, it actually hit our industry, our sort of subset of financial markets earlier. I saw the writing on the wall along with a bunch of other people, and it happened sudden, like going from growing really quickly and having a 200-person company to like doors shut in 60 days. And I went into the CEO's office before that happened, and I said, like, we're kind of in trouble, huh? He's like, yeah, you should get your resume ready. And so I was in survival mode. I had $800 in my bank account and like $30,000 of student loans. And, very standard situation for a lot of new college grads in America, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, I called my brother who was living in Silicon Valley and was like, can I sleep on your couch, basically? He had a spare room with him and his wife. He said, yes, come up here. I ended my lease. I loaded everything up into a U-Haul and I drove up to Silicon Valley. And uh, literally the very next day, so that all happened in a 2-week period, and then the company was completely shut down shortly after that
Wow.
due to '07, '08 collapse. Um, and that was brutal to watch us having to lay off 50 people at a time and cutting off people's insurance and their parking, the whole thing, like a true spectacular meltdown. Um, but I remember this February 2nd of 2008. I arrived in Silicon Valley. February 3rd, so the very next day, I ran a half marathon in San Francisco because I was like, well, I'm here. I was running at the time. Let me go see the city. February 4th, a Monday, I go to a bookstore and I buy a book on HTML and CSS, like front end coding. I buy a book on web analytics and a book on internet marketing. And I sat in a coffee shop that week and basically kind of matrixed all that knowledge into my brain. Started applying for jobs via Craigslist at the time. And inside of like a week, I had an interview, nailed the interview based on all this newfound knowledge I had just
Nice.
somehow absorbed, and got my first job at a digital agency in Silicon Valley. And that was the very first step that I took to get things going there.
Wow. Talk about recovering. That's great. And
Yeah.
so that led to multiple startups and this entrepreneurial spirit that you found yourself surrounded by, right?
Yeah, and so I got my day job. I was learning, doing internet marketing for other companies. I started posting my internet marketing consulting services on Craigslist. I landed a few gigs with some startups. And so I'd be in my day job. And then sometimes at lunch, I would jump to another company's office and spend some time there and come back. Or at the end of the workday, I would go to another startup's office and spend time doing some consulting with them. Again, I was doing whatever it took to just make another $1,000 here, 2,000 there, build some skills in my resume. And all of that scrappiness that I was showing, that's what stood out when I applied to a job at Facebook.
Ah,
And this was in 2008. And true story, the big time executive who was the overall hiring manager, who is now a very famous billionaire investor, um, he uh, he said to me on my first day of the job, he said there were over 400 people who applied for this role. You were the least experienced of all of them. But what I'll say is, we like how scrappy you are because that's what we need here at this company. It's like all the stuff I had done, the story I just told you, plus some details that I haven't shared, just the scrappiness to make it work at any way I could, is what stood out. And I got the job, and I totally wasn't prepared for it. I had to like massively upscale my skills and capabilities. So the first 6 months there was quite difficult. I almost didn't make it. But then I finally hit my groove, really started to stand out, got promoted, so on. And that that really started the upward trajectory. I then went on to Twitter as an early employee there. After my time at Twitter, I went on to a company called Quora. It was one of the first 15 employees, and that's now a fairly big technology company as well. Spent some time as what's called an entrepreneur in residence at Greylock Partners, one of the big venture capital firms. So they kind of like, it's like being knighted in technology circles when a big firm brings you on as what's called an EIR. Um, that firm was run by Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn. Um, and they brought me onto their team for a while. And then eventually I became an early member of a financial technology company called Wealthfront. I was one of the early employees, and eventually rose up and became the president of the company. Almost by premonition, I was preparing to become the CEO, um, but then I had a sort of heart attack scare. At this point, I was 34, almost 35, and instead of becoming the CEO of the company and taking it public, which it's actually about to do in the next couple of months. So shout out to all my friends over at
Right.
Wealthfront. Good job.
Awesome.
But I had to step away, step down as president, not become CEO, focus on my health for a while. Um,
So,
and
what did the doctor say that this was? Was this like actually a heart attack, or was it panic, or?
Good question. I had done a physical. My doctor was saying, "Hey, do a physical. You're getting older." And I found a little window of time to do it between the amount of work I was doing, which is I was totally consumed by that company. Anyone who's been involved in early stage technology companies knows it's a brutal grind. Um, but I went and did this physical. They said, "Hey, you might as well get an EKG while you're here." Got all that done. I jet out of the doctor's office, head back to work, and within 15 minutes, I get a phone call. And he said, "Where are you? How are you feeling?" Said, "I'm at work. I don't know. I'm stressed." He said, "Well, you need to go to the emergency room right now because we're worried your heart's going to stop."
Oh my God.
And so I drove myself to the Stanford emergency room,
But
and
you were just stressed. You weren't feeling anything
no,
specifically.
I wasn't feeling anything specific. Um, I think what they identified was something that had been there for a while at least. The answer I was given to your question was, well, maybe this is genetic, who knows? But, let me give you this talk. I know a bunch of 40-year-old CEOs in Silicon Valley having heart attacks, and you're going to have to do something about your lifestyle and stress, and I kind of laughed. It was like, yeah, you can't make that job easy.
Right.
And so after 2 months of more evaluations and everything, I finally said, like, I can't do this. Truthfully, it was also happening. This was a sign from the universe. The universe was trying to say, like, Andy, this isn't your path anymore.
It's like
Slow
slow down a little
down.
bit.
And under the surface were the deeper psychological wounds that I think played a major role with the condition of my heart because my body was constantly being flooded with stress hormones.
And it
Uh,
also seems that for the first time, the adults that were praising you all your life and giving that positive encouragement were doing the opposite now, saying, wait a minute, if you continue like this, no good, you're going to have a heart attack. So please slow down, change your lifestyle. You hadn't gotten that message, right? Until then.
oh no, no. And even then, I had built, this is the way I think of it now. I had built such a strong persona or ego as a coping mechanism for the difficulties of the past. But then that strong ego, which had served me so well, was now a problem because it was driving me towards an early grave, towards a relentless pursuit of do more, do more, do more. That yeah was no longer contributing to my well-being. It was posing a direct risk to it, and so like that was, even though I had that heart attack scare and it was enough for me to say, okay, I have to step away from this company. 6 7 months later, I end up becoming one of the founding partners for an early stage venture capital firm. And my mind played the trick of saying, oh, yeah, this will be easier. It won't be like another startup. But we were starting up a new venture capital firm, and building a successful venture capital firm is incredibly difficult and
Right.
stressful.
And during those 6 7 months that you stepped away a bit, what did you do? What did you read? Did you look into, I don't know, other philosophies or any kind of things that were outside of your normal toolkit?
No, not really. Not really. Like I had been in therapy, and so I was on and off in therapy for several years towards the latter half of my career, and beginning to work through the uh all the childhood traumas, and just kind of building a map to understand myself more deeply. And so I had begun that work, but I hadn't that switch hadn't happened yet in my head where like I was really invested in this.
Hmm.
Instead, I was still in the like succeed, succeed, succeed pattern. And after all, that had been my pattern for 20, almost 25 years. And and so during that time off, I did go on a road trip, which was cool. Drove throughout the American Southwest. I focused on my health. I spent time with friends. Um, but I was also feeling bored and lost and disconnected because the dominant stimulus that I was used to of high intensity work was gone. And just something for me to like sink my teeth into and to feel like I'm moving in a positive direction. I'm
That there's some purpose,
Yeah, and that
perhaps. Right.
I'm feeding this ego
Right.
that was whose value, whose personal sense of worth was dependent on what he was achieving. And I deeply disliked the sense of not achieving something. And that that really powerful complex subconsciously played a huge role in coercing me to say, yes, let's go do this thing, even though there was from time to time a part of my awareness that said, like, this doesn't feel right. But I just pushed that away
Right.
and instead just move forward. And so, but, and then I ended up doing that for 4 years as a partner of the venture capital firm. And we grew it to 1 billion of assets under management and investing a lot of capital and doing so into some big name companies. But meanwhile, this existential void, like there was something in me that was building, that was feeling a deep sense of misalignment, not only with that specific job, but with that like whole life I had constructed in Silicon Valley. It didn't feel right. And there were twinges of that earlier on. I never quite felt like I fit there. Like it really, like it wasn't quite, there was something about it, but I didn't entertain it long enough to really consider stepping away until things internally for me grew so misaligned. There was so much emotion that was wanting to come to the surface, and this like deep feeling in the pit of my stomach of like I needed to let it go. And I fought that, and I fought that, and I fought that until it reached its pinnacle. And in uh, 2020 is when I finally just listened to that inner voice that was saying, it's time to leave this place. And I did. And that began, I moved out of Silicon Valley. I was still working remotely because this was COVID. But that first move where I physically moved my body out of Silicon Valley back to a small farming community, that's when, boom, that's when things really kicked off for me into this, sort of the era that I'm currently in.
And I'm curious, Andy, the timing of this shift switch for you, did it dawn on you prior to the start of the pandemic, or it was during the start of the pandemic?
I had actually, it had dawned on me prior to it, like that voice inside was getting louder and louder and louder. There was a part of me that knew, like, my time here is coming to an end. It may be 5 years from now, but like I'm not going to do this much longer. Um, and a big part of that actually came on the heels of doing two plant medicine journeys.
Oh, okay.
Um, and so I had been in therapy for on and off for several years, and then there came a point where um, the I had been put in touch with a healer um, who uses plant medicine as one of the healing modalities she uses. And it was all very esoteric to me at the time. I was super rational, material lens on life, an atheist, the whole thing, right? Just like the sort of modern concoction of how to view and interact with the world. And so even though this idea of like, hey Andy, I'm not so sure therapy is going to do much more for you in terms of breaking through that dense ego of yours. I was, like, you might need something, more powerful. Eventually I felt the call to it,
Okay.
and I went and did my first mushroom ceremony, which was profound.
Was it
It took,
psilocybin?
yeah, psilocybin. um,
And did you do it in a group setting or was it an individual
it
journey?
was it was a solo journey. Yeah. And in the care of this talented healer I worked with, and it immediately brought me back to one of my deepest childhood traumas, and I lived it, I re-experienced it, I processed it, I purged what I could emotionally from it, and I resolved a great deal of it. Not all of it, but like a really meaningful portion of it. It really transformed my memory and my experience of it in a way that allowed me to release quite a bit of its sort of negative charge on me. It also gave me some more of the more mystical experiences of sort of astral realm stuff, and so such that I came out of it not only emotionally healed in some ways from some really deep trauma, but also the aperture of my sense of the reality of the human experience had started to open. Um, and then about a year later, I had an ayahuasca ceremony where I had a profound visionary experience with a direct interaction with a spirit, with an entity um, that is actually one of the central entities in the Hindu religion. Having no prior exposure to that, it was only in retrospect that I realized, oh, I think I just encountered Shiva.
Wow.
Um, and Shiva put on this grand display for me. Basically, I'm sitting there, and then my entire field of vision turns red and orange like a liquid fire backdrop, and then up pops uh, a entity seated in front of me, staring directly at me, like 1,000 yard stare, just locked on my eyes. And so I'm like, whoa. And I immediately had this feeling of like, this is an ancient something. This is not normal human. He lifts his hands, and above him, I watch him create the universe,
Wow.
galaxies, stars, everything flying out of it. And amazing. Like, if you could turn that into a sci fi movie, it would be killer. Uh, and then he sort of pauses, throws his hands to the ground, and I watched him destroy the universe. And then he locks his eyes back with mine. And then through uh, a telepathic message, no words were spoken, put the words into my mind. It's time for a fresh start.
Beautiful. I get
And
goosebumps just listening to you retell it.
it was me too. I have them right now from head to toe. And I could still see it very vividly, and I could feel that experience. And I remember opening my eyes um, as he poof disappeared, and being like, "Whoa!" Pardon my language, but thinking, "What the fuck was that? Oh my god!" And but what was powerful about that is, you know, that was just part of the overall experience where I felt sort of the deepest sense of love I'd ever felt in my life during that. And I really needed that then. But it was about a week later, I'm sitting in my office typing away, and I just sort of put my hands on the desk and was like, I don't care about any of this anymore. I don't give a shit. This isn't it. And it was a hard thing for me to do for all the reasons I'd explained. And I got to a point where I'm finally about ready to hit the maximum earning period of my career, and all the financial rewards are going to come in for that absolute grind I just put myself through. And I was ready to walk away from it all. And uh, about 12 to 18 months later, I did. But that started the process of saying, okay, I'm ready to leave this, and I'm going to unwind it all very slowly and try and land the plane as gracefully as I can. But that sort of jarred me free, and helped me step away from it all, which then, when I finally did, initiated a true dark night of the soul. And that's when the real work began.
Yeah, it's what you mentioned is so important for people that are listening. The importance of the integration sessions after such an experience with a psychedelic, a mushroom, or a ayahuasca, because you experience so much in such a short amount of time that you need to process it with a competent professional of the mind, a psychologist of some sort, who can help you deconstruct and process everything. And I actually did that with Emma after my first psilocybin journey. And just being there and listening to myself tell it to her, and she asking the important questions about the experience, was so important to help me return to my normal, quote unquote, having had the insights, and having the insights be a productive, constructive contribution to my next few years, as opposed to letting those insights or the experience sort of swallow me and overwhelm me into a world of confusion. Right.
Totally, totally. And I've seen this too, where people end up using psychedelics almost as a break from reality. And so I've met people where they've said, "Oh, I did Aya 50 times," and I'm like,
Wow.
"Ooh, um, mm, not how it was intended." And
Right.
and there isn't the integration there. Like, maybe it was Alan Watts, I can't recall who it was, but somebody gave the simple example of, with psychedelics, they said, with phone rings, you pick up the phone. Once you get the message, hang the phone up.
Right. Exactly. It's
And
great analogy.
yeah, and the psychedelics, they can give you these really profound insights and epiphanies, and then, to your point, it's like you take that and then you bring it into your life, and that's going to take a while. Truthfully, it'll be a lifelong integration. But if you're going back to medicine over and over and over again, you're loading up on so many insights that you're not allowing time for integration. But you may also be lost now in an ocean of insights where you're trying to make sense of it all, and potentially you can't.
Yeah, it becomes almost like an escapism.
Yes. Yeah, it's an escape from, because you might have experienced this. Many people I've spoken to after their first journey, they have the post journey euphoria, this sort of like halo of lightness around them. They're like, wow, I can feel like this, right? And then eventually that halo fades away, and then you're just back into the human experience. And it's almost like, oh shit,
I need more.
oh, I'm back to this again. And and so it's the desire to want to go back to that, yeah, that somewhat disassociated euphoric state, where it's like,
So
no, no, no.
a lot of people that have near death experience report something similar. They're like, "Oh my
Correct.
God, I'm back to this body now. Oh, this
It,
life."
yeah, it can, the same thing. It can happen through a consistent meditation practice. I've had that experience of incredible joy and euphoria. I'm like, oh, this is that whole enlightenment thing. and then it fades and you're like, ah, shit, it's gone again.
So after 12 to 14 months of this first experience with ayahuasca, you made that decision to sort of step away from your grind. And so take us into the next few chapters there that you said that that's when the real work began for you, the dark night of the soul.
Yeah. So COVID hits, the world's moving towards remote work, and then boom, it pops in my head. Hey, Andy, now you can move out of Silicon Valley, continue working though. So that was my plan. Oh, I'm just going to move out of Silicon Valley because I don't feel like being here anymore. My body doesn't want to be here, but I'll keep working, making good money, keep working. So I move back to a small farming community. Um, and I'm continuing to work remotely, but that that existential dread and that feeling of internal disconnection persisted. So I felt relief being out of Silicon Valley. Coincidentally, I'd been doing blood work at the time, and my blood cortisol levels dropped by 30%. So I was like, okay, that was a good move, for my own health and longevity. Um, Yet that feeling persisted, and so there was more for me to let go of. And eventually, it it became clear it's like I needed to let go of work. I needed to let go of it all. It wasn't right for me anymore. And so I finally, it took like 2 more months to just tell myself, like, just pick up the phone and call your partners and let them know. And I finally did. It was like such a hard internal battle. But as soon as I got off the call, just immense relief. And it was kind of a whole process because I had to unwind, being on the boards I was on and all the things. And I'd made prior commitments and I felt bad about breaking those, but I just knew it was the right thing to do. I didn't know where I was going and what it was leading to. I had no clue. And so finally I'd sort of like set everything aside and moved away from a profession and a place that really personified or embodied my subconscious uh, complex of self-worth being equivalent to what I can achieve and do. And I created space in my life finally. And then that's when like a flood of just all the things I hadn't wanted to feel just came rushing to the surface. And I instinctively, so I'm in an apartment by myself in a city where I know very few people. I'm closer to home, um, but I was just kind of on my own. I left my work behind, my colleagues behind, my ego and identity behind. My friend group from Silicon Valley left it all behind, and so I was just truly alone with what was trying to come up to be addressed and acknowledged and processed. And I started doing a morning meditation routine just kind of instinctively. And what would happen is I'd wake up, and as soon as I woke up, I'd sit up in my bed, start meditating, and I would just cry. Just cry and cry and cry. And there are other times where then I would actually deepen into the meditation. And I just made my own method. It was like I put my earbuds in and I listened to a certain frequency, basically. Like that was the thing for me to concentrate on. And then there was a moment in one of those meditations where I dropped into it deep enough such that what I think happened was my ego defenses, the default mode network, the same thing that goes offline with high dose psychedelics, I managed to quiet it. And that's where part of my ego defenses, when it moved away, all of a sudden what happened in the meditation was it's like I had this spontaneous insight where I saw a collage of faces pop up all at once of like friends and family members of people I knew who had addictions, and I could see it in them for the first time. Like I saw it all, including my own. and it just boom, Andy, you are an addict. And here are all the people in your life who are also addicts. You're going to see it all and you're going to feel it all right now. And just, I opened my eyes. Oh no, I'm an addict. And just a mountain of shame.
Wow.
All, underneath addiction is a tremendous amount of shame. Um, and I was addicted to work, I was addicted to internet, I was addicted to I was developed an addiction to cannabis. It was, the modern concoction of all the
Right.
junk food, whatever's available to get a short-term dose. It was just in this like this like this fabric of just numbing out. And uh and I saw it also clearly in this universe of people around me, but just for days it was just profound shame and weeping that was coming from it, and fear, uh terrible fear that I was heading down a path that my mom was heading down, because that was part of her death. She battled addictions as well. And a few days later, um, it's all kind of a blur when those intense psychic openings happen. You lose a lot of the details. But I was sitting in my home office in my apartment. It's about 6 p.m. I'm still sort of like in this cloud of shame, just struggling and in a dark place. And I had called my therapist and said, "Hey, I think I'm dealing with addiction issues." And she said, "Yeah, I know. Let's get you some help." And I had made arrangements to go to a 45-day addiction recovery center, so I was preparing for that. I started working the 12 steps on my own. I started attending Zoom 12-step meetings. Just shame, just tears and tears coming out. And I'm sitting there on my laptop and I'm just sending an email, and it's about 6 p.m. And there's a window that was in front of me, much like the window that's behind me now. And all of a sudden, I feel this immense presence around me. Like my whole body kind of lit up like an energy. And something compelled me to stand up. I didn't say the words, it was just a feeling like stand up. So I stand up and I look out the window. And as I do, these beams of light come bursting through the clouds. And I just wept. Yeah, I can feel its presence right now. And that same presence, it compelled me to drop to my knees and surrender, and I did. And I just dropped to my knees. I put my head to the ground, and I just cried and cried and cried. And again, it was kind of a blur after that. I don't remember much. Um, I had entered into some alternative state, and eventually I sort of came back to normal coherence a bit a few days later. And everything had changed. And what I mean by that is I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't even dwell on that moment. I was just so immensely present, and a lightness and a joy and an internal sense of like complete comfort and peace. And all of a sudden, I saw aspects of reality very, very clearly. I began to see the world in an entirely different way, a way that I would describe as like the true nature of how the world functions and how people are and how they engage with each other and why they are the way they are and how conditioned they are, like utmost clarity into the sort of conditioning of the human experience that people are sort of caught in. And my sense of self had fundamentally shifted. The hobbies and interests and the compulsions and the desires to do like hard extreme things and to work the way I did, and the sorts of people I wanted to engage with, um, who I felt compelled by, like it all changed. And I had, lack of a better way of describing it, like some aspect of that identity that I understood as myself had been wiped away. There's still an essential part of me that was there, like some of my personality characteristics, but an awful lot of that psychological construct that I developed over a 25-year period, it got eradicated. And I was untethered in terms of a rooted identity in the world. And I remember going into a restaurant for lunch, and I was sitting there looking around, and it was a busy place. There were probably 100 people there. And I was very calm. And I remember this very distinct feeling and experience of this is all a stage. And the people here are playing a character on that stage, but they don't know it. But I know it. And they think I'm a character on this stage. And I'm here as character, but I'm aware that I'm a character. This isn't real in the sense that I thought it was. Now, a psychiatrist may say I was having a psychotic dissociated experience, tranquilize me, here's drugs, put me in a room for a while. Thankfully, none of that happened because what I felt was peace and joy. And I remember these few moments of there were parts of my body that I felt truly for the first time. It was like from my knees down to my feet, I was feeling them. I was like, whoa, I was disconnected from these parts of my body. And I would be sitting there doing nothing with a huge smile on my face. And for the first time, I'm driving in the slow lane on the freeway, being like, "This is nice." Not rushing in the fast lane, and then seeing people where I'd never truly fully like taken in the characteristics of their face before, and being like, "I really see this person now." Um, and Yeah, that was the first like non psychedelic driven real opening that happened. Uh, you know, from my own simple meditation practice, but then the thing that followed was, I'd say, divine grace. It wasn't me. It was something that said, like, I'm here for you, and it's time for something else to happen, to change, and it did. And yeah, that's when the real work began. So I'll just pause there for a second.
Rising from the ashes. Yeah. If you want to take a break, we can pause and come back.
No,
Bath, some
no, I'm
water.
good.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for
Good.
sharing. It's very, very deep, intimate, and meaningful journey, Andy. The thing that gets strikes me as I listen to it is you basically allowed yourself to melt away that previous persona without knowing exactly where you were headed, what was going to replace it. And how do you, in today's recording of this in 2025, how did you find the tools that you are involved with today, back then?
Yeah, so yeah, I had no idea where any of this was going, and at that point, I wasn't even sure I knew who I was. So it's like true lostness, and yeah, I just like the simple metaphor of like the valley between two mountains. I had just finally hopped off that first mountain of life that had defined me so much, and that I got completely lost in. I didn't know what the second mountain was going to be. I had no clue. And all I knew was I'm in this valley, and this valley felt like it was covered in fog and there was no trail. It's just here you are into the void, and this is where you dissolve more deeply. But one of the things that was um, woken up inside of me following those experiences was this eventually like this deep desire, this drive to understand the true nature of reality and the true nature of myself. And so I had this like deep drive to be like, what was that? What what just happened? Who am I? What is all this? And so I started, you get all the books and you watch all the videos, and it began the search, the seeking. And shortly after that, a month later, I was at 45 days at a rehab center. And that was a difficult experience. I'd say that's where I also had an unexpected large psychosomatic release that was initiated by acupuncture.
Oh
I
wow.
didn't see that coming at all. I think I had like cleared so much space and allowed like a lot to come through that I was just raw and emotions were right under the surface and ready to come out. Uh, and so when I was there, I was like, I'm going to try everything. I'll do all the things. And me being, the high achiever, that part is still, it's not like that entirely
Right.
died. It's holding on for dear life. Um, by the third week, I got voted as the class leader, of course. So I'm like, ah, damn it. I didn't even try and do this. And here I am, the leader of the rehab group. Um, and anyhow, I do this. It's called auricular acupuncture. It's all in the ears.
On the ears.
And as soon as the 5 needles went into each ear, I just felt like my shoulders soften, and then this like ball come up into my chest. And I was like, oh, I got to go outside. I was already crying, but I just felt this huge welling up. I go outside, I sit down on this rock. Everyone else had come outside at that point, and then a pure purge happened. My teeth were chattering, my whole body's shaking uncontrollably. I'm sobbing, I'm sweating. Um, and for 15 minutes, my body just shook, my teeth chattered, and I cried and cried and cried. And the words, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, just came out. And all the men circled around me. Some of the trauma therapists came over and they had this really powerful release. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know a lot about the experience of releasing, the trauma that's stored in the body, but that was a big moment. Um, and I eventually returned home and just like continued this deep search. And along the way, like I'm going through it, just ups and downs, ups and downs. I'm still numbing out often, because a lot is coming up and the mind is like, I don't want to feel this. So it's a bit of cannabis here, junk food there, whatever it is. Um, and it was during that relentless search, like the metaphor I use is for me, it hasn't been about one specific technique or method. It's been about, I use the metaphor of the Easter egg hunt, where you can have this experience where something says, are you ready to start this hunt? And to use the framing of Joseph Campbell, like I answered the call,
Right.
and I answered the call to my own hero's journey, and I started that Easter egg hunt. And like an Easter egg hunt, you don't know what eggs you're going to find along the way. And so you're just going around, you're like, oh, I found this egg, and it was an acupuncture egg. Okay.
Right.
And I'd stumbled into another one, was like, oh, that meditation egg, that did it for me before. Or it's the psilocybin egg. And I think that's very common in, call it the sort of new age style of awakening. Um, it's less common than say 500 years ago, where it's like, oh, I'm in India, go to this ashram and stay there
Right.
for 10 years. They have a couple eggs and they use them really well. and you just use those eggs, right?
Right.
In a time where we don't have the same, at least in America, the same sort of cultural support system, and the respect and the recognition of these spiritual and religious mythological methods. You're just kind of like, oh, I'm on my own. I got to go on this hunt, and so you go through that hunt, and mine has been a hunt where it's just been, let me follow my intuition as best I can, or sometimes the universe plops something right in front of me and it feels right. And that's very much so what my process has been like over the last 5 years. And the way that I've come to understand it is like sometimes it's the universe, God working in your favor, putting something in your path that is right for you at that moment. But I've also embraced this metaphor of the Easter egg hunt because my sense is that as you move through the layers of the psyche, maybe at the highest, most layers where you would put something like talk therapy, um, and maybe at the deepest, most level is where you would put communion with God, right? Um, but at different layers of the psyche that one is moving through, as they're releasing old patterns, processing traumas, encountering archetypal energies, which I've done. Um, Different Easter eggs work at different depths of the psyche. Um, and so that's kind of what's happened for me. And so for me, it's been a collection of things. Um, and the generalization I would make is that the commonality of these Easter eggs for me on my own hero's journey has been that they've introduced non-ordinary states of consciousness in those numinous states, to use the Jungian phrase, is where the deep work has always happened for me. Sometimes with psychedelics, sometimes with specific forms of breath work inducing non-ordinary states, sometimes with meditation, sometimes through divine grace, something acting on my behalf, um, sometimes through a religious practice, which has been my most recent experience, which has been really powerful, nearly overwhelming releases that were initiated through a direct felt connection to the symbolism of the cross in Christianity. If I go to church or pray or contemplate the cross, it does very deep work. Um, so yeah, that's been my experience, and initiated by that first opening, which created that immense, like all-consuming desire to be like, who am I and what is actually going on here?
And as we make sense of the world at our fingertips, on our screens, where there are so many options, it's like a playground of unlimited options. Whereas the illusion you made of the ancient times, where you would have a structure of an ashram, of a temple, of a hierarchy of priests that would initiate you into a guided structure of work, you don't really have that as much in popular culture today. And so you're a lot of people are lost on their phones. And it strikes me that during this whole time that you went through the dark night of the soul, that you didn't sort of lose it, or ask yourself, am I going insane? Is this, did I lose it completely? Right.
Oh,
Those
I have.
clashes, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's because, if you just hop on YouTube or Instagram or whatever, or, go to places like Bali, where there's a lot of spiritual bypassing, um, you'll commonly encounter new age messages of, oh, spirituality and awakening is beauty and joy and love and peace and all. And it's like, that's certainly in there. And it's clearly true that for some of us, we may abide in a more persistent state of that sort of like sense of Christ consciousness or Buddha nature within, and that is obtainable. Uh, but it may also be true for folks that there's like, you've got to feel and release the things that need to pass through you as well. And so it is like in my experience and that of several others that I know, it can be brutally difficult. It's I mean, it's right up there with the period of time around the death of my mom and all the stuff that I had to experience and witness. Like, it was brutal. For me, I've had moments of purging, um, and a flow of intense emotion and energy that I don't think is even my own, that it's pushed me into momentary states of psychosis. Um, and I don't encourage that. I I don't it's not something I tried to do, as far as I can tell, it's just part of my process, and our journeys are as unique as our
Right.
fingerprints. And the rational mind wants to grasp at explanations to, like, perfectly understand, why is my journey this way and why is it happening this way? And I just got to a point where it's like, because it is. Um, I think you can be in the hands of a gifted teacher and have really overwhelming experiences, and also gentle, light, beautiful experiences. And it's up. I just sort of give it to God and be like, I maybe it's past life stuff that determines if it's going to be hard or easy. I don't really know. Um, I'm not so sure that I'm in control in the way that I think I am. Um, before we jumped on, I mentioned to you I'm having another wave of, like, very intense dreams. The dream space has been an integral part of my transformation, and I go to sleep and they happen. And when they happen, I don't know. It's not up to me. And what the texture of them is and what wants to come up from my subconscious, it's just it's just happening. I'm riding down this river, just trying to roll with it.
Yeah, it's we live in parallel realities, and when we're in our dream world, we are living another reality that is just as real, if not more real than this one. And the challenge, I think, becomes when you're back in your physical body in this three-dimensional awareness, is if your dreams have been too vivid and too real, how to reconcile that reality with this one. And I think that's part of
Yes.
the integration process you describe. And I believe that's also part of why we're here, you and I mean, to plug Emma's organization, Integrative Mental Health University. They have hundreds of amazing courses to train coaches, psychologists, psychiatrists to grasp a more spiritual paradigm and bring that spiritual paradigm into their practices and with their patients and their clients. But one of her most popular course in her platform is spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. And I think it's a brilliant way to describe it. It emerges, it comes up, but in the process, it can become an urgent crisis. And
Absolutely.
and I think for those that are listening, to go check out imhu.org. The link is here in the description of the video, where you can become a trained facilitator with the certifications to help other people and guide them if you're in that field, to get a better understanding, so that I'm not here saying anything against antidepressants or drugs. They have their very important place, and for some people, it's the most important thing that they can have during a period of time. But it's not the only way. And if you don't also add other tools and just stay with the drugs, they're like a band-aid, right? They're not really going to the underlying cause. So just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's been my experience. There have been periods where I have enough of an opening of my psyche, of subconscious material, including really, like, the most intense emotions that are full panic, that get to the root of what the body was experiencing in the most traumatic states I've had, where that's coming up. And it's wildly disruptive and destabilizing to my nervous system, where there have been periods on and off over the last 10 years for me where uh, I can't be in public, or I can't be around people very often because I'm just in full panic mode. And my nervous system is so sensitive. And this has been one of the things that's been emerging as I'm going deeper into this, is I could feel the energies of people around me. I can just feel them.
Mm.
Um, and and so I've had to become very protective of my own nervous system as sort of a radio receiver of sorts. Um, and during those periods, uh, you can sit there and say meditate and be in nature and do all these grounding techniques, and those help. But there are some times where it's like I need a bit of medication,
Right.
um, and to bridge me during those most acute periods where it's almost impossible, or it is impossible at times, to function normally. And medication has been very helpful for me in those moments. In fact, it was 4 to 5 months ago where I had the most intense psychic emergence of everything that I've been through. Where I believe, that's the difficulty of some of these experiences, is you don't always know exactly what is being released. The body may be releasing something that goes back to like pre-verbal, or what Stan Groff called the perinatal experiences.
Right.
Because somebody's birth can be one of the most traumatic experiences of their life. And for most of us, when you think of like this organism that is like at peace in this protective container of the womb, and all of a sudden it's shot out into this entirely different experience, and it's having to utilize its lungs for the first time. And in my case, um, my mom went into an early induced labor. So I was 2 weeks premature. It was induced by her own psychiatric illness. She was in a very bad state. It's common for women to um, not go the complete term, depending on their own psychiatric state. And it was a chaotic scene leading up to it. And then when it happened, like I was dying in the womb, because it turned out I had the cord wrapped around my neck. And so from my first moment in life, I was shot into the world. I was dead. And cord, I'm purple. I was struggling before that. And for months, I was probably absorbing my mom's, uh, chemical cocktail of her overdrive nervous system as well. That was in me. And my mom was hemorrhaging. She almost died at birth. They had
Wow.
to revive me. So I didn't get that like bonding moment on the mother's chest. Like all of this, like that is so formative of an
Yeah.
experience. And I believe in this most recent um, emergency that I had, it was my psyche and my body was ready to release some of that as well. And so it just started to move through me in a way that was so overwhelming, that I was non-functional for 2, 3 weeks, and experiencing these intense flows of panic and body sweating, uncontrolled shaking and tremors, retching, screaming, coughing as if I'm gasping for air. A lot of these experiences, there was a moment where I felt like, I think this might be birth trauma that's coming out. Um, and boy, has medication been helpful during that period. So, to your original point, yeah, this is having been through all these experiences and continuing to go through them. It's not done for me. Um, I'm not anti the existing paradigm of mental health. It was incredibly important for me in the early days when I first started therapy, and needed to be rooted in guidance from a trained professional and somebody to help me kind of build a map between my prior life experiences and what I was experiencing in that present moment as an adult who was struggling with anxiety and depression. But now, as my experience has deepened, if you will, to what you said earlier, it's like, no, the existing paradigm is helpful, but there's this whole other thing of non-ordinary states of consciousness that, like, that is a huge part of the experience as well. And like, let's integrate that into our standard of care.
And what would you say to some of your colleagues and friends from your past life at Silicon Valley that would be observing you today and would be curious? And, what would you say, if
the
anything?
first the first thing I'd say is, so like, some of them, they're probably like, this is Andy, but he's not the Andy I knew. And the first thing I'd say is, my name is Andy. I'm of sound mind and body, and I promise you, I haven't lost my mind. I have absolutely changed in ways that are irreversible and that I'm happy with. Um, but I would say, you may be skeptical of all this stuff, and I can totally relate to it, and I can understand that. As I mentioned, I was the rational material atheist and viewed everything through a sort of lens of math and physics. And if you can measure it, you can believe it. And if you can't measure it, then don't believe it. And but my lived experiences have shown me that that perspective I used to have was very narrow, into the exclusion of to use a general term, a broader spiritual orientation towards life. There used to be a time in history where we didn't recognize invisible, mysterious forces at all. And then physics came along and was like, oh, yeah, we have these things like gravity and electromagnetic fields and so on. And we recognize that, like, there's an incredible amount of invisible forces at play in architecting the nature of reality and our lived experience. And all I'm suggesting is that not only are those true, as validated through our scientific instruments and measurements, but that there are more invisible things at work that potentially can never be measured and validated by scientific instruments. Some of them will be. There's a time where we used to think meditation was just this thing that esoteric Eastern traditions did. And then we do enough research and we realize, oh, yeah, meditation totally works. The same thing is happening with plant medicines, with psychedelics right now. The same thing is happening with the hormesis effects of hot exposure and cold exposure. Like, there are many of these old sort of spiritual and health practices that we used to also question, and now modern science is completely validating how effective that they are. And all I'm suggesting is that that opening up to old methods and traditions, and that opening up to invisible forces that are responsible for governing our reality, like, that is just continuing. And I have personally experienced, and I know over 100 other people I've connected with who are experiencing similar things as I am, that would traditionally fall into the bucket of old world mysticism. And all I'm saying is, like, it turns out it's true. There are charlatans out there. There are reasons to be skeptical, and one should be very patient and thoughtful, and trust their intuition as they navigate these spiritual processes. But that's my message: is like, I was wrong, and it turns out this stuff is true, and it's had an effect on me that's far greater than I could have imagined. And if somebody really wants to get healthy and to understand themselves more deeply and to embody their true form and to engage with the world in a more conscious, connected way, my experience has been that through these non-ordinary states, through these mythical, spiritual, and religious perspectives, that can happen.
And I think we're seeing a resurgence of all of these ancient traditions that had to be kept secretive and had to remain in the dark because of the attacks from mainstream, the narrative of the mainstream powerful political spheres. And I think you see the same struggle nowadays where the mainstream scientific establishment has a deep concern about maintaining old narratives and find it's incredibly resistant to the type of conversation we are having. So one thing that is very disconcerting to a lot of people is they have their identity as a successful CEO or business person, whatever it is that they do, finding ways to reconcile that with that spiritual nature and all of these conversations that we're having without necessarily destroying that identity of seeing themselves through only productivity. My self-worth is measured by how much I produce, by
Yeah.
how much I do, right?
Yeah, that's one of the most common concerns that I encounter in coaching or spending time with, call it the Silicon Valley types or the laptop class. And a lot of them are like, they're very intelligent. They've worked a long time performing at a high level to get to where they're at. They're being celebrated and validated and encouraged to keep doing more of what they're doing. And then similarly, they may feel that arising existential misalignment, that something in them is saying, this isn't quite right anymore. But the head is saying, no, keep going. Don't let this go. Right? Achieve, succeed, succeed. And they'll come to me at the crossroads of that inner conflict and they'll express something to the effects of like, yeah, I know I got stuff to heal. There's something in me that's really curious and wants to pursue this sort of inner wisdom path and this awakening thing. But I'm worried I'll lose my edge. What if I won't succeed or achieve anymore? Maybe I won't want to start companies anymore. And the thing I'll say to him is like, maybe it doesn't require that you must no longer do any of these things. We all experience sort of different degrees of change and transformation. It's possible that you will, uh, in the same way that I did, sort of lose that drive and desire to want to like achieve and succeed and make money and have all this public esteem. It's possible. Um, but if that does happen, consider what it's creating space for in your life. There's something else that may be emerging. And what emerges out of that could be something that's much closer to your true self. And I'll make it more practical and say to them like, yeah, I used to measure myself based on how big the companies got and how much money was being made, and that was the sort of measuring stick of success. And now I don't do any work that uh, has these big indicators of size and scale in the way that Silicon Valley constantly talks about, size and scale and billions of users and trillions of value. Um, but the metrics of success for me have completely changed to something else, which is more about I helped that person today, and they were in a state of distress. And then during our conversation, they were able to release some, and by the end of it, they were like, and they had a smile on their face and they had some clarity about what to do next and where this path was taking them, and they may go on and help other people. And so I tend to think of it now more in the network effects of helping others. This one conversation that you and I are having, I don't know how many people are going to listen to it, but some will, and it's going to unlock something for them, and then that's going to help them maybe heal or transform in a way that immediately affects the sphere of people around them. And then the domino effect of that as it propagates throughout humanity. And so I don't attempt to like put precise numbers on it anymore. And I don't measure this podcast conversation by how much ad revenue it generates or how many subscriptions or what have you, but rather knowing that like it's having a positive spillover effect into the quality of life for at least one other person that engages with that. And that is now the fuel source that is starting to feed call it like this augmented identity I now have. There's still an ego here. I'm not
Sure.
completely egoless, and I don't think ego is the enemy to begin with,
Exactly.
because it's you need some ego or identity so that you can interface with the world. Um,
Right.
but now it's one that, instead of being fueled by, I don't feel good enough unless my company is making $1 billion, because then that means I'm not a good person. I'm not worthy. Now it's like, that doesn't matter at all. It feels misaligned when I try.
Right.
Now it's, I can feel better about myself because I tried to do something selfless that uplifted another human, which in turn uplifted me.
And for those that are listening and may be afraid of this shift because it sounds too radical based on your experience, is it possible to have both?
Totally, totally. There are living examples, like Michael Singer is a good example. He was the author of the Surrender Experiment, and his short story is he kind of stumbled into meditation in his early 20s while in grad school, and had this big opening, and then he was like, I don't care about this grad school thing anymore. I just want to meditate in the sort of the swamps of Florida, which is what he was doing. And then so he kind of left like the material rat race thing behind, and then the universe kind of like colluded on his behalf and was like, okay, we're gonna like build this ecosystem of a community of other meditators around you. And then somewhere along the way, he ends up starting, God, what was it? It was like a medical technology company. It was a technology company. I forget what sector. And he had like $1 billion exit, while he's, 15, 20 years into his meditation practice.
Right.
Um, and so the two aren't mutually exclusive. I think one absolutely has to be open to the idea that the measure of success will change,
Right.
um, but not in a way that makes you feel worse as a human being. Eventually, that ego that is so attached to traditional material measures of success, it will loosen, it'll let go, and then these other measures of success then have room to come in, and they have like a more enduring quality to them.
Right.
It's a better source of dopamine. Just
Right.
one way to put it.
And I think addressing the next question specifically to men, there's such a gender role in our society that men need to earn money, produce, be protectors, and in order to attract a worthwhile mate and reproduce, and all of these traditional values that we unconsciously are influenced by, right? So, how do we square that up with this augmented version of yourself, of oneself, that also embraces the spiritual, the invisible, and brings the two together in a balanced way, right?
Good question. Well, my experience is, as I'll get go into the sort of Jungian uh, systems on this a little bit. My experience has been that, like, during this transformation, it's been this balance of the animus and the anima, the sort of masculine and the feminine thing. And I came from a blue collar farm environment, two older brothers, a dad. I played sports with men all of my life. It was always like, ah, man things, right? And I think it was for that reason. There's something where it felt like a natural fit working with Heroic Hearts, where
Right.
90% of the veterans are men, and it's kind of this warrior atmosphere, right? Um, but what's happened for me as I've gone through this change is I realized, I was like, I always had women friends, but there wasn't like the emotional openness and the depth and the quality that there is now. Whereas my friend group in the past used to be all men, and now my closest, like, intimate relational friends are women. And it's been this balancing of the masculine and feminine, as the suppressed feminine side of myself has
Right.
sort of made its way to the surface to balance out the masculine piece. And I still have a ways to go there in terms of like being able to translate that into romantic, loving relationships. That's still a deep wound for me. But the shift is happening. And so I guess that's my answer to the question of like, if you allow that balancing of the masculine with the feminine side of it, this is actually pointed in the direction of you being a more whole and complete person. Um, and so it's good for you and for the world around you. Um, I also think this is changing.
Yeah,
Uh, you
agreed.
know, like to men's credit, I'll say this, it's like there's a real argument and a criticism about like the harshness of men and how they can be so, direct or cutthroat or aggressive, whatever terms you want to use, or mean. And the thing I'll say and
A-
reflect on,
Andy,
uh,
just repeat, please, because I think the internet, we had like a connection
uh,
issue here. You said the main criticism for, and then I kind of lost you after
um,
that.
yeah, so the one thing I'll say about like sort of some of the more shadowy descriptions of like traditional masculine characteristics is like it's totally fair to be critical of that. Um, but I'd also say like some of that hardness and that harshness of the traditional masculine definition, some of it was uh, a byproduct of the brutality of the human experience.
Right.
You had to be hard to survive. And what we're seeing is um, now that survival has been, it's not guaranteed, but it's much more likely that it opens up a softening. You don't have to be so brutal and hard for the purpose of just raw survival. And so that softening is happening as we've improved or ensured our survival. And so I think this is a natural trend.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing. Like all things in the universe, I've come to see it as God is seeking balance at all times. And a balance is reestablished through some cycle of creation and destruction, where then whatever was from the past, some aspect of that gets integrated into the future. And I think this is naturally what's happening with masculinity and with femininity. I think we're making some silly mistakes along the way, but that's just part of it. This is how we figure
Yeah.
things out.
It's like the spiral evolution. We revisit places with more consciousness and more awareness. And if, as long as we're doing that, we're going to be spiraling upwards in a positive way, evolving and progressing.
Correct.
Andy, I'd like to ask you to lead us on that final experiential moment of our conversation on spirit reflections. Tell us what you're going to be doing. I'm going to put you on full camera here. And if you'd like some
Okay.
background music, let me know. If you just want silence, that works too.
Oh,
Take it away.
silence is good. Silence
Okay.
is good. So I'm just going to share a parable that was shared with me from a very gifted shaman that I worked with. And it was shared with me and with a few others the day after we had had a psychedelic ceremony. And it was perfect context, and that's why I wanted to share it. And so the question I would ask to people or share with folks is, have you ever been whitewater rafting? And some have, most haven't. Fred, I see you saying
I
yes.
love it. It's amazing.
It's a blast, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that the instructors will do is they will give you a quick safety crash course. And they'll say, okay, put on the vest and the helmet. Here's how you paddle, right? One of the things they'll ask is, what do you do when you get thrown overboard? Because you're going whitewater rafting. That could happen. Um, and it's probably the most important part of the safety tutorial, because usually what happens is somebody gets thrown overboard, they panic. And then they start paddling as hard as they can in an attempt to fight the current. But it's the last thing to do. You have to ignore that panic instinct. And the thing they teach you to do is go into what I call mummy mode, which is you just put your hands across your chest and you stick your legs out like you're, a mummy. because you're surrendering to the current. The river knows where it wants to go, and it'll go around rocks and trees and around the bends and up and down and what have you. And by surrendering to the current, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get bumps and bruises along the way. But what it absolutely means is like you're not going to fight against an unstoppable current. And what happens is when you fight the current, you tire out, and then that's when you're really in danger. That's when you really struggle. That's when people drown. And so you have to just surrender, let go, and the current will take you downstream. And it'll take you where it's trying to take you, where it's always been trying to take you. And there'll be a moment where you realize, this is where I can get out to shore easily and safely, or I can just grab this rock and be able to do so with much less struggle. And it's a beautiful message because it builds on the old paradigm of life as a river. And I think this flow of reality that we are currently in is the same way. And in my prior life, as I just kept fighting and fighting and was resisting where the current was trying to take me and hanging on to my Silicon Valley life, the suffering got deeper and deeper to a point where I would hit crisis. I was really struggling because I couldn't let go. Um, and this journey for me and for all of us, I think, is just a progressive experience of learning how to surrender and to trust, and that maybe this river of life has a plan for you. And if you let go, it's going to take you where it's intended to take you. And you'll see that in retrospect. And so I just wanted to share that because I think for me, it perfectly captures maybe the most essential spiritual practice, which is surrender. It's going to be okay.
Beautiful. It's peaceful and it's calming, soothing. I
And it's
appreciate
hard
that,
to
Andy.
do.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Because there's a lot of rocks and the current is strong and it's bumpy.
I still struggle with it. So
Yeah. Andy, thank you so much for your presence, for sharing your light, your experience here around the fire on Spirit Reflections. The Heroic Hearts Project link is below. IMHU link is below. The other links you're going to send me, Andy, they wish to share, they're going to be there below as well. So like and subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments, what you'd like to hear next. And I'll see you in the around the fire in the next episode. Don't go anywhere, Andy. We'll speak as soon as I stop recording.
yeah, thanks, Fred.
Bye.